In every single educational space, there's times that have tough conversations. My guest has written a dynamic work that helps us navigate how to have those difficult conversations and who we need to be and how we need to show up so we can deal with the pink elephant. We'll be back on the next side to talk with her more. Hello, hello, hello.
Hi, Bobby. How are you?
I'm doing all right. I'm doing all right. I'm excited to have this conversation with you. But before we do anything about any content, I want to make sure we honor who you are and you sharing space with you. So please, why don't you tell folks that will be listening who you are, what you do, and why you do it?
Sure. I just want to first of all say thank you so much for being in virtual community with me and inviting me onto your platform. I always love to just have these types of conversations, and it's always nice to be in community with folks, our people. My name is Janice Gassam Asare. I am a consultant. I call myself an anti-racism consultant, but I feel like I focus and center my work on Black people and Black liberation and what that looks like in the workplace, and creating a workplace where Black people are free from harm and are able to grow, thrive, and advance. And so, my first love is writing. I've had the opportunity to write two books, one of which we're going to talk about, but it's called The Pink Elephant. And I've talked about the pink elephant in before, but the pink elephant is the hot pink elephant is like race, right? So in the workplace, imagine seeing a hot pink elephant and ignoring it or pretending that you don't see it, right? But from the corner of your eye, it's hard to ignore that hot pink elephant that walks in the room. And I always say the hot pink elephant is how we treat race and racism in the workplace. We pretend, as a system, we pretend like we don't see it. Leaders oftentimes aren't engaged in conversations about racism and anti-blackness. And so my goal with writing this book was really creating a space for us to have more conversations about the ways that racism manifests and anti-blackness manifests. And so I'm a writer, I'm a consultant, I am just a lover of all things food and sweets. So that is just like a little bit about me and some of the things that I do.
Yeah, I actually just saw your documenting your time away. I think where you just came back from
Aruba.
Aruba, that's what it was.
Yeah.
Yes. And
Yeah.
I mean, I think one, I'm all for our people living and enjoying and breathing and just existing where they can exude joy and happiness. And I would just, I'm a fan of that anytime I can see it. So, um, yeah, I'm really excited to have this conversation. How was that trip for you, by the way?
Thank you for asking. It was amazing. It was actually the first trip that I took where I did not bring my laptop. I recently resigned from the university that I was working at, so it was kind of like a liberatory trip for me in a lot of different ways. I didn't bring my computer, and I was able to just soak up the people. And I loved when I travel places to learn about the Black history. And it's fun to go and like just free your mind and free yourself. But I always also feel like I owe it to the ancestors to learn about the Black people that have been in whatever country, their journey and their story. So it was really interesting to learn about and see where the Black Arubans live, the part of the country where they live. And so it was just so nice. It was so relaxing. I want to go back. It seems like they difficult time during the pandemic. So they're really
Mm,
grateful when people come in because their country thrives on tourism. So, going and supporting local businesses is so important because they were really hurt during the pandemic because so much of their country thrives on tourist dollars. So it was great.
Got you. Got you. Yeah, I'm gonna make sure I add that to the list of places
Yeah, I was
that
gonna
we
ask
got to
if
go.
you've been there. Have you been to? I haven't done a lot of Caribbean exploring, so it was. I want to make it my goal because it's so close to us on the East Coast. So I'm
Yeah.
like, there's so many countries I want to go. Have you done a lot of Caribbean exploring?
No. So, my last experience, we took like a family cruise back when I was, um, this had to be late high school, early college. So this is younger years now, where
Mhm.
my family and we went out and St. Lucia, St. Croix, and places
Oh.
like that.
Mhm.
But I myself haven't been, but I want to go, and so
Mhm.
it is on the list of
Mhm.
things that we got to make sure we get accomplished. Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Definitely. I think it's a nice family environment, and it's like also very I just it's something about seeing black people free. Like black people not weighed down by what's happening to us in the world. And I feel like I loved going to Jamaica, and there was just
Mm,
something about seeing people that looked like us and not going places and feeling like an outsider. And I feel like we're conditioned to believe we should be traveling to Europe. For our honeymoon, we went to, my partner is originally from Ghana. So we went to Ghana and we went to Egypt. And I remember telling people we were going to Ghana, and they were like, "You're going to Ghana for your honeymoon? Like, why Ghana? Why not like, you know, Italy or this place or
or
that place?" And I
Paris.
just was like,
Yeah,
right. And it's just like, and no shade to anyone that wants to travel to those places, but I feel like we've been conditioned to believe that those places are better, and that places where people look like us are not the places we should be going. So I also think that as we travel, that's also even our motivation to go to certain places is rooted in what we've been programmed to believe.
it's almost as if like travel as resistance, if that makes sense. Like even
Yeah,
in
yeah.
the
I love that.
destination,
Yeah.
you know. And I think that
Yeah.
says something too about those that would be watching you and those that would take their cues and be challenged, that even in your activity of where you choose to show up, there's a message behind that and something that we can learn and glean from. So absolutely.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, and I think we don't think about it a lot, right? And we don't think about also how, and I was one of those people, right? I went with a friend in 2014 to Brazil, and we took a favela tour, and I didn't realize like how problematic that was. It's essentially you're going to a poor part of the country where they had a lot of enslaved people, and that part of the country and Rio is still poor, and it's almost like taking a tour into the Bronx or into like Newark or into any lower income, primarily black part of a city, and like having people give tours and then make money off of that, right? And it was so
Mm,
problematic, and I didn't realize until years later, right? Almost 10 years later. But I think like even when we travel, we don't that's not often the central focus when we're going places. We just want to relax and vacation, but even where we stay, right? And the places that we're supporting. So it's like I feel like traveling is even like political in different
yeah.
ways.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, you know, that that example that you talk about of even and how you show up. So we've had conversations offline and whatnot, and I think we've been pretty familiar with each other. But I've been in education, K-12 education, for the last 12 years, and in those 12 years, there've been kind of a lot of lessons that I've learned. When you talked about just now, going to those places where that might be impoverished, that you see it, the hands of oppression and how things even
Hmm.
look in the way that people interact, or even how people are, you know, are affected by these things. That was my first teaching experience. I was in Camden, New Jersey, which was,
Mhm.
voted the poorest, most dangerous place to live
Mhm.
in our nation.
Mhm.
But I saw such brilliance and such um, resistance, if you will, in those young people, right? And so, but I got handed this book called Teach Like a Champion, and I was told this is how I needed to teach. And there were so many problematic practices within that book that basically exercise control over these young people as the main metric, as almost like the penicillin to brown and black life. We got to control them. And I bought it because I didn't know any differently, and I wasn't challenged. And I started going on this journey of unlearning. And this journey of unlearning is continuously, like even now to present day. And so I always pick up literature, books, whatever I can that's going to help challenge my thinking. So fast forward to, this is probably about I say maybe beginning of the summer. I know I was outside cutting the grass, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to get my sis Janice's book. And so I went on to Audible. I clicked it. I downloaded it. I had you in my ears, and people would have thought I was crazy because I'm mowing the lawn and I'm like, yes, I agree with that. And I'm going through. So for those that don't know,
Mhm.
please intro your book and kind of talk to us about why you decided to write it.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed the audible version. I'm a audible person. I just feel like I can't find the time I used to be able to like sit down and read as much as I want, but I love Audible and I love to talk, so it kind of worked out. But yeah, so I actually was writing this as, so I wrote my first book. I really wanted like a very basic introductory guide to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So when the pandemic hit, um, and that's a whole nother, we could get into that. But I had some issues at the university I was working with where I had some free time, some extra time. So April of 2020, I decided I wanted to write a book, right? And I was like, I want a very simple guide to DEI in the workplace. And this was pre George Floyd, right? And I made a point to release it on Juneteenth, right? And I was like, I want to release my book June 19th. That was the same year, George Floyd happened. There was more like sort of the public consciousness about Juneteenth and Black people and what we've been experiencing in this country peaked. I don't want to say peaked, but it increased. And so I didn't know that book was going to come at, unfortunately, a time where it was so needed, right after the loss of Black life. And after I released that book, I was like, I was operating, honestly, Bobby, from a place where I felt I didn't want to come out of the gate releasing a book that focused on racism. I wanted something that was more broad and general, right? That was marketable. And that was my thought and intention going into writing my first book, Dirty Diversity. But this book, I was like, people were asking me specifically, okay, we got your first book, but like, help us with anti-racism and anti-oppression in the workplace and what that looks like and how to create an anti-racist organization, right? Because everyone was going out and buying Ibram Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, and everyone was going out and buying So You Want to Talk About Race, and all of these books that were specifically about dealing with and having conversations about racism. But at that time, there weren't a lot of books about racial equity and anti-racism in the workplace, right? I looked up anti-racist organization, and prior to 2020 there was nothing that had come out focusing on that. So I was like, I need to come out with this book. And then I write articles for Forbes, and I've talked about the pink elephant in previous articles I've written. I had a 2019 article where I first mentioned like the pink elephant. So I was like, I want to write about race specifically. And this was also happening while we were learning more about Breonna Taylor and her losing her life. And so I was really like invigorated to write this book, and I actually dedicated the book to Breonna Taylor. And I was, as I was writing, I was just thinking, how do I, like, what are the ways that we center Black people and other racially marginalized people, and their experiences in the workplace, and what is important for people to understand when approaching anti-racism in the workplace. And I think a huge part of that is the historical piece. And I touched on it a little bit in the book, but I feel like, in order to create policies and practices that center and prioritize the most harmed communities, we have to understand the historical piece of what these communities have gone through. And there's a lot of things I did not learn. I'm originally from Virginia, and a lot of historical things in this country have happened in the state where I was raised in. And in high school in US history, I never learned about, there's so many things I never learned about. 40 acres and a mule, and I never learned about, literally, Bobby, like 30 minutes from where I went to high school was the port where they first brought enslaved people to this country. I had
Mm,
no idea, right? I know Colonial Williamsburg, we go there for field trips, right? We go to Monticello, we go to like these places. I did not know that literally, like, near Hampton, Virginia, there is the port. Like, none of these things were known, right? And so I felt like, and I still feel like a lot of it is, and that's where you come in as somebody who's an educator who has experience in K through 12 education. You play such a vital role in that education piece, because I didn't learn about any of the real and true, like, history of our country, right? We learned about the war, some of the wars, we learned about things here and there, but a lot of these things that inform our understanding of other communities and what they've gone through, we just don't learn. So I felt like I wanted to create a resource that people could have to start their anti-racism journey in the workplace. But I also recognize the need for, and I have so many ideas for other books, but I feel like there's also a need to prioritize Black people specifically in the
mhm.
workplace. And we need to have more conversations about that. So that was like, that was a lot. That was a mouthful, but that's
No,
a
this is
little bit
good.
of why I wanted to write this book.
Yeah, I really appreciated that before you went to this is the how-to part of the book, you grounded people in this is the history. Like you arrive in the middle of a story, and if you don't know the history behind the chapter that you're in, you'll write the rest of the book like that stuff didn't happen.
Mhm,
And unfortunately, there are plenty of spaces and places where people are working and serving, education being one of them,
mhm,
K to 12, and from what I hear, higher ed as well, where
mhm,
the the story is being written as though history didn't exist,
mhm, mhm,
where we almost have this ostrich syndrome when it comes to history. We want to bury our heads in the sand. We don't want to acknowledge it. We don't want to deal with it. We don't want to say it happened. um and part of it, I think, and this is where I want you to chime in here, as part of it is I think that there is we have told ourselves this and bought the lie of the heroism of America,
mhm,
that we don't necessarily have any metrics, any understand, any framework, if you will, for the complexity of America. Like, has America done some great things? Yes, absolutely. America's done some great things. Has America done some horrific things and probably still participate? Not even probably still participates in them. Yes. And saying yes to both of those things is almost mind blowing to some people.
mhm,
Has that been your experience? Um, and knowing that it has been mine, what advice could we give to those who are grappling with those two almost competing truths, if you will?
mhm. It's really, honestly, Bobby, it's really difficult because I also think, for me, there's an added layer of, my parents immigrated here from Cameroon, which is a country right next to Nigeria. So So they raised us here. So when people ask me, what am I my whole life? Like I'm black, right? I didn't feel that connection to my parents' culture because my dad was really intentional about, he changed our last names so they were more American. He didn't teach us, the native language. They speak French and they speak some native languages. They didn't teach us any of that. We don't eat the food, right? And as kids, we were like, we don't like this. We want American food, right? And so, like, that part of my culture has been stripped from me. But when in my 20s, I first went back there for the very first time, I recognized how many freedoms and liberties in the United States that I had that I
Mm.
didn't know that I had because I spent my whole life right in the US, right? And so I think that that tension is you can hold those two truths, or those two things can be true, where this country is had there's a lot of freedoms and liberties we're able to experience in this country, but at the same time there's so much that needs to change. And I think it was James Baldwin who said, I love America, and I'm going to butcher this quote, but he said, I love America, so I reserve that allows me to
More than any
criticize her. I
other
want
country.
and
Yeah.
Right. And criticism, I feel like criticism helps people to become better. And I think that us criticizing America is not because we don't love this country. And for many people, I don't know if your ancestors were enslaved, but if your ancestors were enslaved, you literally, like, they literally built this country, right? So it's interesting that people will say, well, if you don't like this country, move out, right? And to the people that say that, why would you move? You literally, like, enslaved people built this entire country. The universities we go to were built by enslaved people, right? So I struggle with that, right? Because when I travel, it also helps me to recognize the privilege that I have as an American. Having an American passport comes with so much privilege, right? And I think that it makes it sometimes like it's a challenge for me to there's tension that I feel, right? Sometimes it causes that cognitive dissonance where I feel like, should I just shut up and be happy that I live in this country where I have so many freedoms, where my family in Cameroon, we don't have the freedoms that I can't speak as a journalist or as a writer and say the things that I'm saying and writing. You can't do that in Cameroon. They'll, you know, my mom doesn't like me bad mouthing the country, because she feels like, it's just I shouldn't be bad mouthing the Cameroon. But there's a lot of freedoms that we have here as Americans that they don't have, right? And so it makes it challenging sometimes for me to call these things out and call out. But I think of the James Baldwin quote a lot, and I think that it's we are criticizing America because we see that there is not equitable treatment. We're not treated justly and fairly, and it's okay to call those things out. And I think I'm trying to be more intentional about doing that. But I think you and I both know that in doing that, there is a level of, I don't want to say danger, but we have to be mindful of that, of what comes with that, right? And I think
Yeah.
um I am so sort of like, I don't like telling people, for example, like where I live and these sorts of things, because we see people who are very outspoken about these sorts of things. Ijoma Olowu, who wrote the book So You Want to Talk About Race, she's been doxxed, right? All of these
Yeah.
people have been, and so it's like when you are very outspoken about these things, you almost put a target on your back. But I
Absolutely.
feel like if that's what it's going to take to liberate Black people, then I think that that's just a sacrifice that I'm comfortable with making, because I think about what the Black Americans in this country sacrificed, even like with the Montgomery bus boycott, right? I think about like how so many people were able to get on one accord and say that we are going to do this thing for months, right? We are going to boycott and we are not going to, and so I think about that. And I think that in doing this work, we have to be comfortable with sacrifice, because I think a lot of this work takes sacrifice and compromising potential opportunities because we know that it's
Right.
not going to contribute to.
No, I so resonate with that. I think it's interesting because, you know, when you talk about issues in our country, when you bring up any level of critique, just like you said, it does paint a target on your back for people, whether that comes in the form of insults, whether that comes in the form of people with their, you know, Twitter fingers underneath in the comment section
Mhm,
of your posts, um or the really conservative, I don't even like using that word because what does that mean anymore?
mhm.
The really conservative, you know, MAGA crowd
Yeah,
that's on IG that'll find your stuff, and next thing you
yeah,
know, you're being talked about on that side.
yeah,
It's very interesting,
yeah.
um, you know, world, and it's so, you know, for me, um, I think about, to your point, the ways in which history has not been told, and today is still not being told. And I'm talking about K to 12. I'm looking at
Mhm,
my son learn a lesson about Henry Box Brown, who mailed himself to
mhm,
freedom in Philly. And so
mhm,
I'm listening to the teacher teach. This is like during the pandemic. So I'm literally teaching a class. I have a break. He's next to me learning, you know, his stuff. And I'm just listening in.
mhm,
And everything was painted like, look how brave he was. Look
mhm,
how resilient he was. Look how all like look at what he endured. But none of it was said like, well, what are the conditions that made it so that he had to pour acid on his hands to get out of
mhm,
work to then mail himself
mhm,
in a box to freedom. Like we didn't but none of that was even
mhm,
touched on. They didn't talk about it. It was just look how noble this black guy was. And I had to turn and
mhm,
talk to my son after that and be like, this is what was missing from that lesson. And this are the
mhm,
some things that you're going to have to deal with as you navigate the world as a black man. This is how people are
mhm,
going to see you in some spaces. Does that mean everybody? No, but I want you to be prepared before you get there. And now I think
mhm,
about the fact that I wasn't given that in schools. Like the only time I saw a black man in a history textbook was Crispus Attucks, and he got shot, and then there was the Revolutionary War, right? Like that's literally all I
yeah.
saw. Um, and so I would love to know, um, if in your work, if you could think of any spaces where like that history has led to like some transformational moments for folks where you've seen it
Mhm,
kind of help people click on and now they get it and now they're moving in a better fashion. I think it's so easy for us. I think because of the work that we do to talk about the things that are wrong, and sometimes we don't center hope and joy and progress
mhm,
sometimes in our conversations. And so I would love for us in this moment, if we could, to talk about, you know, where are some moments where because we talked about a right history, people are now sensing it, seeing it, and moving forward productively.
mhm. I think that's a really great question, and I do feel like I prefer the talking about of history over asking Black people and other racially marginalized people to regurgitate our trauma. I think there's a practice where, especially after the murder of George Floyd, I spoke with a lot of people, and there were a few Black men that I spoke with who said, my company asked me if I wanted to speak on racism. And it's like people who aren't in the anti-oppression space, who are like marketers or accountants. And I'm like, so you agreed to tell a story about when you were 8 years old and you were accosted by the police, or you were you had this really traumatic situation. What do you feel like that like did, right? And I'm very firm in this, where I think that empathy and white enlightenment shouldn't come at the expense of Black people. And I think it often does, where we're
Mhm.
expected to regurgitate our pain, regurgitate our past traumas for the sake of white enlightenment. And that's not going to move the needle. I don't believe it will, because we've lived through so much. We've lived through Rodney King, right? And
Yeah.
so people's argument was like, oh, if we see it, it creates that visceral response. Well, Rodney King happened 30 years ago. People saw it, right? People saw it. And what did that really, like, from a systemic perspective, what did that actually change? So I actually like leaning into history, because understanding the history that a community has faced helps us to understand what sorts of policies and practices and interventions we can develop or we can introduce to help that particular community, right? So I think that, like, understanding how people have been historically marginalized or historically excluded will help us in the workplace, for example, right? So creating a mentorship program, because we recognize that in this particular industry, there were not a lot of people who are encouraged to study this and who were given the skills that are necessary to navigate this environment. So we're creating a mentorship program for Black employees, right? Because we have an understanding of how these employees have been, or how this community was treated throughout history, right? And so I think there's some examples of this. I don't see it happening as often as I feel like it should, but I'll give an example. Is like one phenomenon that happens in the workplace is something called the bamboo ceiling, right? Where Asian Asian employees are less likely to be seen as leaders, because of the traits we associate with leaders aren't typically traits that are associated with Asian people, right? East Asians, let's say. And so having an understanding of the history, right, and how stereotypes have been applied to Asian people specifically can help us to understand or develop programs. If you have a lot of Asian employees in your workplace, developing a program specifically designed to sort of I don't want to say equip Asian leaders with the skills, because I don't think it's that they lack the skills. I think it's that we have stereotypes and these perceptions, but having that historical understanding helps us to design interventions for a particular group. And the reason why, like, going back to the pink elephant, I have a chapter in the book speaking specifically about Black employees, is that I truly agree with the Combahee River Collective, that said that once we free Black women, all other groups will be free, because Black women experience the most severest forms of marginalization. And I'm speaking specifically to the US, right? And I think globally, anti Blackness is global, but Black women experience very severe forms of oppression. And by liberating the most oppressed group, I think everyone will benefit. So when we're thinking about our workplaces, I think it's so important that we're asking, how are we centering the most marginalized? Because in this anti-oppression space, we're not often centering the most marginalized. We're centering white leaders and what they want. And I know when I come into spaces and do work, I used to do that, where I was like, well, I'm not going to talk about these things if they don't want me to, if they feel like it's going to make people uncomfortable. And I had to realize and had a moment where I was just like, I've been centering whiteness so much in my work. And that is not, centering whiteness is not going to liberate Black people, right? And so, how can I reshift the focus? And I think history is an important part of that, but it's not the only thing. And I think consistently centering and prioritizing Black people in our workplaces is how we get everyone to achieve liberation. And I think that I ask myself a lot, like, what does liberation look like in the workplace, right? I don't think we asked this question a lot. And I think one of the ways that white supremacy operates is it takes away our ability to imagine and dream. I think many of us, even from, I'm sure you could speak to this in the classroom, I feel like a lot of Black children don't dream big dreams because of how we've been conditioned. And so I think it's important to ask ourselves, what does liberation look like in the workplace? Is a liberated workplace even possible? What does it look like? What does it feel like? So I think, I don't know if that really answered your question, but those are thoughts I would.
No, I think it's spot on because you know I what I hear you saying is that when we really do a deep dive of history and we look at the issues at play when For example, we talked about Rodney King, right? We talk about, for example, my first teaching stop in Camden, right? If I were
Mhm.
just to assume Camden got there and is poor because black people didn't manage their money right and this is just what
Mhm.
happened, then my practices would assume guilt on them
Mhm.
versus saying, oh no, they built roads that led to greater access for businesses, and those businesses moved out of Camden and then moved to other spaces, which then created this divide, if you will, of the haves and have nots. And so now the
Mhm.
people who depended on those businesses don't have them anymore, and
Mhm.
now that leads to greater crime, greater poverty, and issues that we're seeing right now in Camden, right? And so when I look at that, now I can say, all right, if I'm a school leader and I'm designing a liberatory framing of my school, then I want to have as many apprenticeship programs as I can to build into,
Mhm.
what does it look like for me to now have not just the sons and daughters, but maybe the parents are now partnering together and getting skills necessary to be able to do that. What does it like to put them into uh, computer programming roles,
Mhm.
computers, preparing them for the
Yeah.
future, right? Because we've seen what history does, we can now plan a better and bigger and brighter future for folks. The second thing that I think is really, really powerful that you said is the ability to dream. There is a sense in which I often question my own liberatory practice because I've been conditioned not to dream big. Right. And so if in the same breath, I'll say, I want, for example, I want to build a school. I've never said that publicly. This is the first time I think I've ever said this. I want to
Mhm.
build a school where
Really?
black
We
folks can
you will manifest that.
and see, even
You
as
will
I say
manifest
it,
that,
there is a tension in
like that
my
tension.
yes. You know what I mean? Where I'm like, can I
Yeah.
really do that? Well, can I acquire the money? What will that take? Can I? And then all these doubts creep in, and now it's almost like
Mhm.
it's choking the dream from me, if
Mhm.
that makes sense. And I think the same
Mhm.
thing happens all around if we're not cognizant of it. I would love for you to jump in here because I could just keep going.
Mhm. Yeah. No, no, and I think like I think often about this Angela Davis, like it's they asked Angela Davis, like, are you optimistic, right? Given everything that you've seen, that you've witnessed, are you optimistic about the future? And she said, we have no choice but to be optimistic, right? Like
Mm,
if we operate and live as if nothing will change, then nothing will change. And I truly believe that we have the ability to dream the world that we want to see manifested. And I'm like a firm believer. I know a lot of people are like not really into it, but I'm really into like manifestation. And I do think that what we tell ourselves um, will come to fruition, right? And I know that a lot of spiritual practices talk about the power of the tongue and
yeah,
saying what we want to see created in this world. So I do think, and I think that educators play such a vital role in instilling that into our children, right? And I'm honestly, Bobby, like scared for like my future children because
mm,
these schools right now, like, and so I don't know what your thoughts are on like you have experience in K-12, seeing what your children learn or may learn, and then kind of coming away and saying like you don't know all the teachers and their background and whether they're what lens they're operating in, what their life experiences have taught them about black people, black children. So all of these things come up, but I think that we can't be deterred by like what's happening. I'm hopeful that each of us is working to chip away at racist systems and oppressive systems, and I truly believe that conversations like this and like anything that we do, I think contributes to that chipping away. But I also like think that it's important for us to encourage our children to dream because I feel like our generation wasn't given that opportunity. I don't think my parents taught me to. My parents did a lot of amazing things for me, but I don't know if I was necessarily encouraged to dream. I was told this is what I need to do because if I want to be successful, these are the paths that I need to take. And I think I tried to stick to that to an extent, but I've realized as I've gotten older that there's beauty in following what you're being called to do, right? And I would have never thought 10 years ago, and I know my dad would have never thought like I would have used my psychology degree in the way that I'm using it, right? And so I think that we can't stop, we can't let what is happening in the world stop us from dreaming and thinking and manifesting the things that we want. I think that's something that's really important. In the book Post Traumatic Slave Syndrome, Dr. Joy DeGruy talked about learned helplessness. And I think a lot of Black people have learned helplessness where we've been in a condition for so long that we just have convinced ourselves that there's no way that we are going to transcend our current reality. And I think that you have so much power as an educator to break, to not even to like lead children away from that. Cause I think it starts when we're young, right? Where we believe narratives and they manifest in our lives, I think partially because we believe that and because the conditions are right to where it's easy for us to kind of fall into certain patterns and behaviors. But I think going back to the what we were talking about regarding history, I think that not enough people in our workplace understand the historical context so that when we're proposing policies and practices, it seems like one group is getting an unfair advantage, right? Affirmative action is a great example of something that was created to remedy the systemic issues, but white people have like co-opted it and said
Yep.
Black people are getting this unfair advantage when we all know white women
White
benefit
women.
from
Yeah.
it, right? And so like I think if you if they understood the history of how Black people and other marginalized groups have been historically excluded, affirmative action makes complete sense, right? But instead we get these lawsuits and these people suing these universities saying you excluded me because I am white. And you know it's so interesting, Bobby, because Kina and I were having a conversation about how oftentimes when you create programs and policies for a marginalized group, for Black people specifically, um, it always gets sort of like co-opted where people feel like you have to make it inclusive. Why can't there just be a space
Yes.
for Black people only? Why do we have to have this like we have to make it inclusive for everyone? That's a whole nother like that's an interesting conversation, right? Where maybe let's say you intended to create a school for Black kids. Someone somewhere is probably going to be like, Bobby, you need to include other kids, right?
Absolutely.
Why do you want to have a Black school for only like so there's a lot of conversations that we have to have, but I think we can't allow ourselves to believe that our current reality will be our reality forever. And we have to encourage ourselves to dream. And I like to journal,
Yeah.
right? Because I feel like journaling helps me to like think about the things that I want to manifest. I like to, um, just like I allow myself to daydream. I think we discourage people from just sitting and like looking into space, right? I've always been like told, don't be bored. You have to always be doing something. But sometimes I just allow myself to just let my thoughts drift off. And I think that there's a lot of beauty in that.
Yeah, man. I think that there is, in the same way we talked about earlier about just even a resistance being in our travel, there is a resistance in our dreaming that
Mhm.
says, despite the fact that you try to take this away from me, yet still I'm going to dream, yet still I'm going to achieve, yet still I'm going to manifest these things that should be mine.
Mhm.
Right. I I think about that. And I'm wondering, let's say somebody's listening to this conversation. They,
Mhm.
you know, and they hear what you're saying. They lead a small business, they lead a school, they they're a dean in a higher ed program, and they're like, you know what? I have been silent or inactive. but what
Mhm.
can I do today? Like, what are some things that I can do to start this journey of building an anti-racist institution so that people can dream better, so that people can thrive where I do have some semblance of control? How do I do that?
Mhm. That's a great question. I would say, when was the last time you took stock of your Black employees? When was the last time you asked racially marginalized employees what they're feeling, what they want, what they need to grow and thrive? Too often I come into companies and leaders tell me what they think employees want without asking them, right? And so I think that we have to be asking, what is it that our employees need to grow, thrive, and advance? Is it that everyone wants to work from home? Is it that they like, what specific interventions can we design or develop that help people in this environment to thrive? I think
Mhm.
that's so important. And I think that's not a question that, I've worked in academia for 7 years. That's not a question that I was ever asked. What do you need as a Black woman, as the only Black woman in this department? What do you need to grow and to thrive and to advance, right? How can I support you, right? What is it that I have that you need? And how can we, and I think that just in life, right? That's a great question to be asking, because I think too often things are very transactional, right? And I'm a person, I don't want to say I'm sensitive, but I'm maybe like a little, like, I take things very, because I love Black people and I love to be in community with Black people. And sometimes I take it personally when someone reaches out to me and I feel like it's a very transactional relationship, or that they're seeking, right? Because I'm not a transactional person, and I feel like if there's a way I can help somebody, I try to. And I
Right.
feel like we should be operating from that mindset, right? Where we're all a community, where there's nothing, none of us ever accomplish or achieve anything solo, right?
Right.
Anything that we need and we want is within our community. So I I think it's important to lean on the people in your workplace and figure out what it is that the most oppressed and marginalized employees need, and how can I provide that for them. And as a leader of a company, it's not like people are always going to ask for more money. That's something that's consistent, right? Is like, people want more money, but beyond that, like, money isn't what makes people leave companies, right? Money is not in and of itself what causes people to leave. It could be an add-on, right? If, Bobby, you're in a school district, you don't like the your colleagues, the kids are a lot, and you're not getting paid what you feel like you deserve. That might be the catalyst to you leaving.
Right.
But you being satisfied with your coworkers, with the kids, and then not getting paid in and of itself is usually not enough to make somebody leave. So I think really being intentional about, like, surveying the people in your organization and figuring out, because when we do these surveys, it's usually like engagement surveys, DEI surveys, but we don't often disaggregate the data to figure out what Black employees specifically want. And then when we look at that, we get that information, we take the survey, we don't apply it, right? Employees might be saying, hey, I want a mentorship program, I want a sponsor, I want an ERG, I want an employee resource group.
Yeah.
And it's just like, where do we see that information actually manifesting? I think a lot of companies don't look at resignation letters, right? So I was really intentional. I wrote, Bobby, my resignation letter was 4 pages. It was six, and then I edited it down. It was very long, and I provided line by line for, like Aaliyah. I sat there and I wrote a 4 page letter, because I was like, I want you all to have everything you need to make this environment better for the Black people that are still here, for the Black students. So I went line by line and explained every way that that institution made me feel excluded. And so I
Mm.
think we should be, are we looking at resignation letters, and are we doing exit interviews, right? A lot of times when people are leaving a company, that's when they lay it all out. When you're leaving a school district, when you're leaving your job, you are very candid with the ways that you felt harmed in that environment. So I think making sure we're prioritizing the needs of the most marginalized in any workplace is one thing that a leader or anyone listening to this can actually do. That could be asking your coworker or your colleague how they want to feel supported, or what can you do to make them feel supported. So I think we don't ask that question enough. We often ask, what can you give me, or what can I extract from you, and not enough of like, how can I support you, and what do I have that I can give to you, or I can, what, how can we be a resource for each other?
Yeah. I what you said about community resonates so deeply with me is, I think about even since starting Liberation Lab, right? And starting my business and platform, you know, getting to know people in a different light because, there was a point in which I wasn't on anybody's radar. Nobody really knew. And then you get to, some level of people getting to know you
Hmm.
and how people interact with you. It, it, it's different for some folks. And, I've been in spaces where it was like people people will just like, for example, send you a message, never talked to you before in their lives.
Hmm.
Like they followed you, never, but never said anything, never asked you how you were, nothing. But then they send a message, hey, can you share this for me? It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
like you don't even talk to me. Like you don't even
Yeah.
know who I am
Exactly.
outside of anything. And yet you have these expectations. Or, you know, it's and I hate it. I hate it because I see my people almost fighting over the scraps that have been
Hmm.
left at
Hmm.
the other side of, when oppression takes all the things off the table, we're fighting for the scraps. And it's like, nah, you realize if you take what you got and I take what I have and you take what you have and we put this thing together, you
Hmm.
know, uh, I always think about Big Mama and Soul Food. She's like, to
Yeah.
separate, we ain't got no power. But if we take those fingers and we ball them up, we can
Yeah.
strike a mighty blow. I always think about that in how we should be doing community. So
Yeah.
I'm grateful for you sharing that, and I affirm so much of that. Um,
Yeah, and
what?
I just want to say
Please.
one thing based on what you said. I think one of the other ways that white supremacy operates is making us feel like we're in competition with each other. And so, like in this space, I love to help people, right? People will message me, like Kina and I connected, and she was like, how do you accept payments? What is your, like, as a business owner? And I shared everything that I experienced with her and said, don't do net 60, don't do net 30. Like we should be like a village of knowledge for each other, and we gatekeep knowledge, right? We don't want to
Hmm.
share information or tell each other because we've been programmed to believe we're in competition with one another. So I think that that's one of the ways that white supremacy operates, is like making us feel like, oh, I can't share this with Bobby, or I can't share this with Kina because I'm in competition with them, right? Without
Yeah.
realizing, I feel like in this space, especially anti-oppression work, I cannot change the world by myself.
Yeah.
You cannot, we're not doing this, we cannot accomplish anything as individuals, but coming together, right? Like that fist that you described, coming together is what's really going to chip away at these racist systems.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, I want to do a couple things I know our time's getting short, but I want to honor your time and want to ask a couple of things first.
Sure.
I would I asked this question of guests who come on the show, and if you had three wishes, three liberatory wishes that you think would help move us forward, what three things would you wish for?
I love that question. That is a great question. I would first wish for more community, because I feel like I'm a firm believer in like community care, and I feel like I learn more from the people within my community than I do a Google search, right? So I would wish for more opportunities for us to be in community. I would, what is another wish that I wish for us to have more opportunities to rest,
Hmm.
because you know I was very grateful for the pandemic, because I was so burnt out. I was so exhausted, and I was
Mm,
able to teach from home, and I was able to, and I think that the pandemic brought a lot of sadness and pain and grief, but the pandemic also gave us as those of us who are chronically exhausted, it gave us an opportunity to just rest and pause. So I wish, and maybe, we're approaching the end of summer, we're going into the fall and the winter, and I feel like there's so much going on with sicknesses and illnesses that maybe this new season will offer us an opportunity. But I wish for more opportunities to rest, because I also feel like, Bobby, you may feel like this as well. Like when I'm rested, when I'm on vacation, or when I'm taking a shower, when I'm not thinking about the things that, when I'm not in work mode, that's when ideas come to me and I'm able
mhm.
to be creative. And I wish more opportunities for rest for us. But it's hard because we live in a society, a capitalist society, where we have to work to live. So,
Right.
I was just speaking with Kina, and she's like, you need to just take a week off. And I was like, yeah, it sounds really nice, but I don't think that I'm at the point where I would feel comfortable. I have fears, right? About like, oh, I can't, I have to do this. I have to. So I wish for more rest for us, because I think it's our birthright to be able to rest. I don't know
That's real
what
good.
my third one would be. Maybe some sort of fusion, an opportunity for us to be in community and rest, right? Like
Mhm.
and I just this weekend I went to a Black women's retreat, and it was sponsored by this. It's 150 acres on indigenous land in upstate New York, and they sponsored 25 Black women business owners to come and just be there on the grounds and just rest. And I wish more of that for us, right? And so I think maybe that's like a cop out third wish, but I wish for more of that. I wish we had more opportunities to be in community intentionally, without sort of like it feeling transactional. Because to your point, it makes me sad that I'm really excited to be in community with people, and sometimes when like people reach out to me and I know that it's transactional and they just want to be informed, or they just want something from me, I just don't even respond. I'm just like, this is not, and it makes me sad to do that, because I love to be in
Yeah,
community with other Black people. But I I want like honest, like real connections with people.
absolutely. Absolutely. And now I would say it's a cop out. I love the fusion of both. I think it made me think like, man, when is the last time I ever felt like that? You know?
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
I don't know if I have an answer. So it's something I'm gonna take with me,
Yeah.
even
When
after
was
this
the last
conversation.
time you felt like you developed honest connections with people?
No, more of the ease,
Oh,
that you're talking about, that rest.
yeah. Yeah.
And I don't know when the last time I've ever been in that situation. And as the point about connection, I think it's hard because we are more connected now
Mhm.
than ever before, yet it's hard to get authenticity.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
everything here is so like I like quality, I like excellence. I
Mhm.
want to put out a good product because I care about it and because I care about who I am and my name is attached to it, right? But at the same
Mhm.
time, you're gonna catch stuff from me where I'm like, yo, here's what I'm learning right now.
Mhm.
Here's how I've messed up and I'm trying to grow from it. Right. Because I think that
Mhm.
stuff helps. If we can be honest and authentic and put ourselves out there, I think there's so much of people who are lodging critiques at others,
Mhm.
yet fail to see how they personally can grow. Like if everything that we say is like, y'all need to, and never
Mhm.
like I'm learning to, then I
Mhm.
feel like we're missing it, right? Because how can we truly say we're about liberation if we
Mhm.
ourselves aren't growing and developing and being more liberated now than we were before? You know what I mean?
Mhm. Yeah. No, absolutely. I think I'm trying to extend more grace to people who, I know we're not all at the same level in our consciousness. And so
Right.
I'm trying to extend more grace to people who, um, I think I used to be like, into the like Black excellence, Black capitalism. But I'm moving away from that because I realize that though that might help me as an individual, it's not going to
Mhm.
contribute to, it's not going to move us toward liberation. And I'm trying to be sensitive to people who aren't at that point in their consciousness, because I feel like I can see that and be quick to judge and be like, no, that's not, but I'm trying to be sensitive to and more graceful to Black people, because I think we have a proclivity to like be more critical of each
Mhm.
other. And even, within our businesses, right, when Black businesses or business owners make a mistake, we are very quick to like, I don't know if you've been following what happened with the pink sauce lady. I don't know if you're familiar with the pink sauce lady. You got to get it. So on a very quick version
But
on
yeah,
TikTok, there is a Black woman. She's a chef, but I'm not really sure. Yeah, I guess she calls herself a chef, so she's a chef. She made pink sauce, right? It's eye catching. It's a hot pink sauce she put over her food, and she put it on TikTok, and people started saying, we want to try it. Can we get this pink sauce? Where can we buy it? So she's like, okay, I'm gonna make it. She made the pink sauce and was selling it. She made it in her kitchen and was selling it to people on TikTok who wanted to buy it. And it blew up. She went viral, and people started noticing that the pink sauce was different colors, right? People didn't know what was in it. um, there was milk in it initially, and it came to you unrefrigerated, right, without dry ice. And some people's pink sauce was more like Pepto Bismol looking. Other people's was like a hot pink sauce. The way she was making it was like, I guess, not sanitary. Essentially, you can't sell a food product without it being FDA approved.
FDA
She
approved.
didn't
Yeah,
know what the FDA was, and she was like, I'm not selling medical products. I don't need to be so like there was a lot of like mistakes that were made on her part when selling the product, but I think it was such a genius idea. Who's
yeah.
ever heard of a pink sauce? It looked very alluring in the videos, but I don't feel like people extended a lot of grace to her. There were a lot of lawsuits, and but I'm like, why are you buying sauce? Why? We got to also look at ourselves and say, why are we buying
Why?
sauce from somebody that is not a vet? Like, so I think the way that people, like the vitriol that was hurled at her, wasn't deserved. She made a mistake and didn't know her product would blow up, right? And
Right.
get something. This was like about a month ago, right? And I was just following the narrative and what people were saying, and I just was like, I wish business owners could have pulled her in, people who have products, and pulled her in and said, "Hey, sis, like this was a great idea. It could have been executed better. This is
Yeah.
what you need to do moving forward," versus getting on our platforms and like disparaging her, right? And
Absolutely.
so I wish we would extend more grace to each other, because we're all unlearning, right? Like we're all on a journey to unlearning, and even those of us who are in the space are unlearning, and right. And how can I'm not an expert. I have to constantly be unlearning my own internalized anti-blackness. And so I wish offer we would offer each other more grace.
I so affirm that. I even think about the ways in which, we use, and me and Kina talk about this all the time, is the idea of expertise
Mm-hmm.
or mastery of a concept, even in K to 12 education. Like, have you really mastered? Can you master anything? And the idea that we can say that word, given the history of that word, is also deeply problematic for me. But another talk
Great
for another
point.
time.
That's actually something I never thought about. Mastery,
Yeah.
great point.
Yeah.
I literally have never called myself an expert, right? And
Right.
so it's this need to like police Black people, right? And I saw someone on LinkedIn say this. She made a typo in a post, and she said the number of people that came into her DMs, flooded her DMs to let her know that one word was spelled incorrectly out of like the paragraph she posted. And it's like this need to like correct Black people and
Yeah.
police Black people. And I think like I do not like calling myself an expert, but I think some of us as Black people wield our expertise against others. That's a whole nother conversation
Oof.
about elitism. But, I had a conversation with somebody the other day, and they're like, I learned that this psychological term, and I didn't want to say to this person, like, I could sit here and literally be like, I have a PhD in psychology, like, I you can't tell me, like, but I was just like, I need to fight that urge because that's ingrained whiteness in me to like be like, so that was like a very
Mm,
long-winded response to what you said, but I definitely appreciate what you said, about not using the term expert.
yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely. This listen, we gotta do this again. This is good. I
Definitely. I know your schedule gets busy once you start school, right?
right. Right. We'll make it happen. We'll
Yeah,
find some time and coordinate the schedules because I think there's a lot still to be said and
yeah.
productive conversations. So I want to do two things that as we round out our time. First, I want to let you know to thank you. I think that often in this work it is thankless work. It
Hmm.
is you putting yourself out there continuously and then never really knowing or getting sample sizes, if you will, of the effect that you might be having. Are you really hitting the targets that you wanted to?
Hmm.
Um, for me, I've from the onset, I have said that liberation can't happen without Black women.
Hmm.
Um, I wholeheartedly believe that. I try to live that out. I ask my sisters to check me all the time about those things because I know how ingrained misogyny and sexism and all those things can be. Um, and so, in this process of unlearning, I have tried really, really hard to connect with sisters that I know are doing this work. And I look to them even before we had a conversation. You were somebody that I looked to for to gain some level of understanding, to grow with. And then we started connecting on top of that, and I was just like, oh my gosh, she's such an amazing person.
Hmm.
So I wanted
Thank you.
to
I appreciate
thank
that.
you. Yeah.
That means
Yeah.
a lot, especially because you said, yeah, this work, it can be really heavy. It can be like, am I making an impact or a difference, or why am I doing this work? When I
Yeah.
could just do a 9 to 5 and not be bothered with all of this. So I really appreciate that, and I'm a words of affirmation person. So I love getting verbal affirmations from friends and family and just people I'm in community with. So I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Absolutely. For anybody who's watching and is like, listen, I didn't know about Dr. Janice. How do they connect with you? How can they get in touch with you? And how can they buy your phenomenal books?
Well, thank you for sharing your platform and introducing your audience to my books. My books are available on Amazon. You could also buy it personally from me through my website, which is just drjanicegassam.com. And I'm mostly on LinkedIn and Instagram. I'm really trying to be a TikTok person. Feels like so much work, and I know you have to be really consistent on TikTok every day posting. But I'm on LinkedIn. I live on LinkedIn and I live on Instagram. So if you're on those, let's connect because I love to just be in community with folks. So thank you so much, Bobby, for this conversation. It was great. And I look forward to us chatting again in the very near future.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time. And listen, for anybody listening, please connect with the sister. She is phenomenal. And we'll see you on the next side. Peace,
Thank
y'all.
you.